So here's the upper limit problem. Each of us has an inner thermostat setting that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. Then what happens when we exceed that? Something happens which causes us to put on the brakes and shrink back into our old zone where we feel secure. One of my discoveries is that it's not necessary to go through that cycle. So the cycle of feeling good, then having an upper limit and pulling back down, or having success in business, then hitting an upper limit and pulling back, or having more intimacy at home and then hitting an upper limit and pulling back. My discovery was that those are all based on fears. And I'll explain exactly what those fears are in just a moment. But here's the first thing I had to figure out in myself when I first began to dawn on me what was going on in my own life. I made this discovery way back in the 80s. I first started figuring out how the upper limit problem worked. When people asked me how long it took to write The Big Leap, well, I said, I thought about it for 30 years, and then it took me a year to write it. So back in the 80s, I started having the following thoughts. If I could eliminate the things I do that stop the flow of positive energy, would it be possible to actually feel great all the time? That was one of my first big wonder questions. And at the time, I did not feel great all the time. Now I do. And what happened in between? I'll show you in a moment. So here's another question I hatched. Could I allow things to go well in my life all the time? In other words, if I cleared away my upper limit issues and my barriers, would it be possible just to thrive all the time in an uninterrupted way rather than thrive, crash, thrive, crash, thrive, crash? Same thing in relationships. In relationship, could I learn to live in harmony all the time? Could I learn to be in a state of intimacy with another person without blowing it up every few days or every few weeks? That had been the pattern for me in my relationship since I was a teenager. And when I began to think about this, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I had not at that time created a healthy long-term relationship. And I always say that up until I met Katie, my relationships all had the general trajectory of the Titanic, because they would start out with great fanfare, but after 6 months or so, I'd hit an iceberg and the relationship would fall apart, or we'd find somebody else, or we'd break up. And it took me a number of those in my teens and 20s until I figured out that the iceberg wasn't out there, it was in here. And I was keep hitting up against the same issues I'd carried around since I was a kid. And to find my way through those was one of the great adventures of my life. In fact, we write a lot about it in our book, Conscious Loving. So I was asking that big question before I met Katie. If I cleared this stuff out of the way, could I actually have a relationship that ran on positive energy? It seemed like an outlandish idea at the time. Then I broadened the question. Could our species itself live in waves of peace and harmony and prosperity, free of the pattern of prosper, crash, boom, bust, elation, depression? Those kinds of things have been going on, but are they really necessary? Is it possible to have something besides peace, war, peace, war, peace, war? I think so. I think that's one of the things I think we ought to take a stand for, is creating a planet that runs on waves of positive energy rather than in waves of boom, bust, and prosper, crash.